have with us psychotherapist Julia Boyd, who is the author of 4 highly praised and best-selling self-help books. And I want to show you them, some of them. Her books are Can I Get a Witness? For Sisters When the Blues Are More Than a Song. Embracing the Fire. Sisters talk about sex and relationships. There's Girlfriend to Girlfriend, Everyday Wisdom from the Sister Circle, but I don't have a copy of that one. But there's In the Company of Sisters, Black Women and Self-Esteem, and they are all available on Amazon.com. And they're in print, which is every single one of them is in print, which is a tremendous tribute, because any of you who've written books knows that they go out of print real fast if they're not real good. So these ones are very, very good indeed. They are packed with insight and wisdom, and we're lucky enough to have her here today to give us some of those insights and share some of that wisdom on this beautiful day. So thank you for coming all the way from Seattle for us, Julia Boyd.
Thank you very much. I have so much insight, I'm trying to figure out how to put this on. I'm getting there. But I am so honored to be here. I want to thank you all for the invitation. This is just lovely, and it is such a privilege. I got a chance to really hear some, can you hear me okay? Hear some really fine speakers, and they did a lot of work for me, actually, this morning. I had a lot of the work done for me, so therefore, I can get more into the anecdotal part of dealing with self-esteem and depression, because I think that's where we want to be. I want to ask you all a quick question. Are you all comfortable? No? You're all comfortable? Good. Because I'm going to, I want you all to be comfortable, because I want this side of the room to move over there, and I want you to move over here. Can you do that for me? Let's go. Okay, come on, are we moving? How we doing? Little confusion. Come on, find a seat, just sit down. Okay. I want to welcome you to the world of depression. Okay? I want to introduce you to one of the first signs, confusion. Am I right? A little confusion, some frustration, irritability. Hello. Okay? This is what it starts to look like in the beginning. What's going on? What's wrong with me? You know, how come I'm doing this? Why am I feeling like this? I feel like I'm on automatic pilot. I'm going, but nothing's happening. Going through the normal routine, going back and forth. Loss of pleasure, you know. Fun is a 4-letter word, W-O-R-K. Don't have time for it, don't have energy for it, just trying to keep going. 4 red flags. 4 red flags. How we think. We tend to be very critical of ourselves and everyone around us. No light at the end of the tunnel. We're really focusing down, and we can't take any information in, and there's no information going out. Second red flag, how we feel. Moody, irritable. Of course, we don't get irritable. We get evil, okay? We get real evil. sad, kind of down, in a funk. Third red flag, how we act. More withdrawn, withholding, moving away from, shutting down, taking no pleasure in our activities, things that we once enjoyed. 1 minute we can be having a perfectly calm conversation. The next minute we're blowing off or we're in tears. I knew I was in trouble when I was crying over dog food commercials. Okay? Fourth red flag, how our bodies react. Headaches, stomach aches, irritable bowel syndromes, okay? Hypertension. Now, changes in our eating and sleeping behavior, loss of libido. It's one thing not to want sex. It's another thing not to know you don't want sex. These are all flags, all four of them. Sense of hopelessness, helplessness. And the big news is they're all treatable. But I think the difficulty for a lot of us is the fact that we don't know it's an illness that we're dealing with. Because most of the symptoms of depression for us mimic personal weakness. We have a strong commitment, is the word I'll use, to being strong. As Black women, we've been raised to believe that we can handle anything. And we do. We do it so well. We do it well enough to get depressed to not know we're depressed, okay? Which is scary. It's really scary. Because as Sister Proctor pointed out in her session this morning, and those of you that were there, a lot of us are being misdiagnosed because we're going in and we don't know what's wrong with us. And up until about, I want to say maybe 5 years ago, and I don't even think it's been that long, doctors, physicians were not diagnosing Black women or women of color, period, with depression. And if it's not diagnosed, it cannot be treated. And depression is very, very treatable. And I think that's what we've got to remember for ourselves. It doesn't feel good. Like I said, it mimics what we consider to be personal or you know, it's just too close to weakness for us. And we have difficulty in allowing ourselves to feel and believe that we're weak, that we can't take care of ourselves. Emotionally, physically, spiritually. But all those things are interrelated. We can't separate out one from the other. If I'm not physically doing well, then I'm not going to do well emotionally, and I'm not going to do well mentally. We've got to bring those things together. And oftentimes I'll get calls from docs and they'll say, will you assess this person for signs or symptoms of depression? Because they're coming in with a lot of flu-like symptoms, but there's no virus present. And sure enough, they will have some depression going on. Because I'll take them through pretty much the same 4 red flags that I gave you. And it's like, if you've got 3 out of those 4 going on, there's a chance that there's some depression present. If you got 4 of those 4, there's no doubt in my mind. And if they've lasted for more than 2 weeks, bingo, tilt, we're there. But we're real reluctant to hear the word depression. I had to write a book about it for myself. It wasn't so much for everyone else. It was for me because I too was locked into the stereotype of being a strong black woman, of wanting to handle it all. And it came home to me in a very personal kind of way. It hit home for me with my mother's death. I didn't know what was going on. I jokingly tell people that I became a therapist because I wanted to know when I was going crazy. And I didn't know if I could trust anybody enough to tell me, okay? So I figured I better bone up on it so that if it ever happened, I'd know what was going on. But the reality was that I wasn't going crazy, but I was dealing with depression. And it was scary because it felt like another label for me to wear. I was black, female, single parent. You know the litany, all the way down. But then I started reading, I started looking, and I came across some really important information. And the more I read, the more informed I became. And the more informed I became, the more I wanted to put the information out there. Because without information, we don't have options. And so until I started really looking at myself and looking at what was going on with me, I felt my options were in someone else's hands. I felt like I had no power. No one has more power than we do as individuals. I want to quote from someone I admire very much and kind of cut my womanist teeth on her work. She defined herself as a black mother, lesbian, scholar. I'm speaking of the late Audre Lorde. How many of you are familiar with Audre? Yes, many of you. And Audre Lorde says, if we do not define ourselves for ourselves, we will be defined by others for their use and to our detriment. And that's happened a lot for us. Too much as far as our care goes. That oftentimes our care gets defined by others. And we don't define for ourselves what's going on in order to better take care of ourselves. We're busy being strong. But I think we need to redefine what our strength looks like. Because while I like being strong, I also recognize that being strong will kill me. So I think we've got to start redefining our strength in terms of our humanness. Because without that, nothing else matters. Healthcare for us is not just personal, it is also political. Sister Proctor pointed out this morning about who gets grants to study healthcare issues. And it's really, I mean, when you start looking at the statistics on who gets the money to study what, where, when, and how, you know who's getting taken care of. We've got to start making a commitment to having ourselves taken care of. We are important. You know, I have sisters say to me all the time, well, you know, our mothers and our foremothers did not deal with depression. Yeah. So how can I be depressed? They had much more to deal with than I got to deal with. It's like, hello? Yes, they too dealt with depression. We did not have the language at that time. Nor did we have the healthcare options at that time so that they could get the care that they needed. But that does not mean that they didn't deal with it. Their options were different. Their lives looked different. Our lives looked different. You know, my mother, bless her heart, passed away 4 years ago. And her whole thing was cleaning. Mama loved to clean. Bless her heart. Her favorite sentence was, you can eat off my floors. And we could. Okay? My mother had 9 kids, and you could eat off her. I know because I helped wash them. Okay? And that was my model for what my life was to look like. That I was not only supposed to go to school, get everything done, raise this kid, but you were supposed to be able to eat off the floor. Until I had a friend of mine say, well, why do you think they make plates? What do you want to eat off the floor for? It's like, bingo, information input here that my life can look different. And that's why my mother worked so hard so that I could go to school to get the education that I needed so that I wouldn't have to eat off of my floors. I could use the plates. So opening that door a little wider, giving me more options, just like we will give others more options. Being on the front side as a care provider, I see us coming in the door. But I work in a clinical setting. And what I'm discovering is we still haven't and fully don't trust mental health just yet. What we trust, okay, is ourselves. But we wait so long. And being in a clinical setting, I get to see sisters coming in with hypertension, okay? And they're not coming in to see me, they're coming into the doctor. Because, you know, we're hurting. By the time we get to the doctor, we're hurting bad. Because we're gonna wait. We're good at waiting. We're gonna make sure it's a bona fide illness before we actually go through the door. So by the time we get in the door, we're dealing with severe health issues. You know, hypertension, heart disease, ulcers, you know, irritable bowel syndrome, eating disorders, sleep disturbance. And it's like, fix it now. The doc will say, you know, I want you to talk to Miss Boyd over here. Wait, you got to fix this first. We want to fix. And I'm one too. You know, honey, I'm quick to say, fix me. But I recognize that there's more than one way for us to take care of ourselves. And that's what took so long. That it's okay to talk about how I'm feeling, what I'm thinking, how I'm behaving. And it doesn't mean that I'm not strong, that I can still be a strong black woman and recognize that I can't always handle it all. That I shouldn't even expect that I will handle it all. You know, now when someone refers to me as a strong black woman, you know what I do? I step aside. Because anybody who starts telling me how strong I am, they want to lean on me. It's true. Check it out. The next time somebody said, yes, sister, you're a strong black woman. Say, whoa. And then after that, and it's not a bad thing. It's not a bad thing to be strong, to see ourselves as strong. But I think we have to start looking at our strength and defining our strength in such a way that it means a continuance of life. That the message that we're giving to our younger brothers and sisters out there is that you've got to take care of yourself, and this is a part of it. Talking about how you're dealing with things emotionally is a big part of it. Recently, I saw some numbers that suggest that alcohol and drug use are up for young black women in the community. And those numbers are true. I believe that a lot of, and I look at abuse of food, sex, alcohol, or drugs as a disease. I kind of follow the disease model. And when I look at that model, what I recognize is that they are using substances to deal with feeling. which is really scary because we don't allow ourselves to talk about issues. I am looking at, and this has been an ongoing thing for me for a while because in the setting that I'm currently in Seattle, we deal with a lot of eating disorder young folks. And what I'm recognizing is that for women of color, especially black women, we deal with an eating disorder, but it's not in the mode of starvation. We overeat to compensate. You know, it's kind of like the bigger we are, the more worry we carry. Yeah. We can really kind of take on the weight. We can shoulder the weight. So it's a matter of comfort. So in helping folks, you know, when we have sisters coming in and they want to categorize them as obese, I'm saying, we're talking about an eating disorder here. What else is going on? We've got to start looking at it from that venue as well. The same goes on with drugs and alcohol. This is about, you know, kind of muffling a lot of the feelings that keep coming up. And the literature also supports this in that a large number of young women, I haven't seen it across the board, I've just seen for women, and they did not break it out racially and ethnically. But once they move off of drugs and alcohol, like going through a recovery program, what they often find is that the majority of these women are dealing with depression as well as anxiety. And that never gets touched. It never gets dealt with. Basically because we're trying to deal with it ourselves. We're trying to take it on ourselves. Now, and I had a young sister who went through recovery who told me that it was easier for her to use drugs than it was to talk about her feelings. And I don't think she's alone with that. I really don't. In fact, I know she's not alone with that. I think that goes for many of us. We don't talk about the things that disturb us. We see ourselves as being able to handle it. And what does that often mean? Because what I'm aware of is that there are some problems in our lives that don't have ready solutions. And depression is nothing more than unresolved stress that builds and builds and builds and builds until we start spiraling down. When I was looking at the literature on black women and depression, I couldn't readily find anything on the books. There were some numbers there. But what I did find was that within the last 10 years, we have lost 3 prominent black women, and I would dare to say there are probably more, to depression. You know who the 3 women I'm talking about? Leonida McLean, who was a well-known journalist in Chicago. Okay. Phyllis Hyman, songstress, and Terry Jewell, young black writer. There's also speculation now, and I've only read bits and pieces, I haven't read the whole thing, that Dorothy Dandridge, a lot of what went on with her dealt with depression. And in the 3 cases that I named in the beginning, each of these women left notes that would suggest how hopeless and helpless they felt in not being able to readily talk about. I mean, like Leonida McLean's note was about not understanding, not thinking that others would understand her conflicted feeling a lot of the time, and her mood a lot of the time. And I would dare to suggest that there are possibly many more of us that kind of go that route. I remember mentioning this to a group I was talking to not too long ago, and I was talking to, and I had this one sister say, but black folks don't commit suicide. Like, excuse me? Yeah, we do. We don't talk about it. Again, we don't talk about it. But yes, we too can feel the depths of despair to the point where we feel like the only option we have is to get out of life. We have got to unite ourselves. That's why I'm so very honored and happy to be here today, because this is a first. The first of what I hope will be many conferences of this kind. Because this is getting the word out. What I'm saying is going to be passed on. What our sisters and brothers have said earlier in today and the other sessions will be passed on. It is your job to take this information and pass it on. Sisters ask me all the time, well, what about role models? You are the role model. They're not necessarily listening all the time to what we say. They are looking at what we do. I believe in taking an ill day, okay? And for those of you who don't know, that means I love life, okay? I don't take sick days off from work, but I'll be ill because I love life. I need to take care of myself. I've got to practice what I preach because sisters are watching. Young sisters are watching. I can't tell a young sister, girl, don't you smoke that cigarette because it's going to give you lung cancer and you're going to die if I'm standing up there puffing, okay? I can't say to my young sisters and brothers out there, don't drink that alcohol, you know, if I got a scotch and water in my hand. We've got to start modeling. Yes, you know, I hear all the time, well, you know, I came from a dysfunctional family, or, you know, I'll be real honest with you, I work with families. I don't know of any that don't have some dysfunction. Real honestly, to be true, okay? You know I'm talking the truth. The reality is there are also functional pieces within that dysfunction. And we can move from what was functional. The thing I love about being an adult, and this is what I have to tell my son all the time, is I get to make rules. Okay, so as an adult person, I can make some rules, and I can make better rules or different rules than were made for me, and hopefully healthier rules, because I have the option of having more information available to me that I can use, and that's very important. We can't tell our kids not to hit each other if we're hitting our kids. Well, I know that always gets a rise, but it's true. We've got to learn. I mean, part of what we're doing has to be passed down. I want my younger sisters and brothers to have more knowledge than me, not less. I want them to know that they can talk about how they feel, how they think. I want them to know that their behavior is not the only thing that they're going to be judged on, and that there's not just one population of who we are. We are across the globe. We are everywhere. As a black people, we are very, very powerful. But in order to pass that message on, we've got to live the message. We've got to be willing to kind of take some risk, to do things differently, so that going to a therapist is not okay because it means talking about your business. I'll tell you a secret. You may think you're not talking about your business, but your body keeps no secrets, okay? Because it's related. You know, it's like I had a sister tell me, well, you know, that's personal. No, it's never personal. Anytime you've got to step into a doctor's office or a hospital or a clinic, it ceased to be personal. From there on in, it's political as well. Are we getting the help we need? On some fronts. You know, some of us are starting to address those issues. But not enough. I want more. When we look at policy, when I was talking to Hazel over the phone, she wrote the commentary. She said, well, what do you see as being important? I want to see more folks in education out there educating us around these issues. I want to see more information. I want to see more research done. I want us to look at the effects of the environment and of society on our health issues. I need to see that so that I can pass it on. I can look at it programmatically. I can look at what works in therapy for my sisters and brothers and take it out there so it can work for all of us. I want to see you develop programs that we can put out there. Not programs that are going to last 1 or 2 years. You know, we've had a lot of good programs that fizzle and go away after a couple of years because the grant money runs out. There's no support for them. And we need, especially in the area of healthcare, we need programs to continue. And again, I'm not just talking about physical or mental health, because I don't think we can separate the two out. I think they have to be linked, and I think they have to be closely linked, so that we're talking about wholeness as health, because that's the big, important piece. Audre Lorde says again very clearly, the master's tools shall not dissemble the master's house. They may lend us a little bit of courage, but with that courage, we can redefine who and how we see ourselves. And that's a big, important piece right there. Redefining ourselves as healthy is what's going to count and what's going to matter the most. And I want us to be the healthiest people we know how to be, both emotionally, physically, mentally, and spiritually. And I want to pass that baton on to you all, because you're going to be here long after I'm dust, and somebody's got to do the work. So I want to thank you again for inviting me here, and I think we can do some questions.
Thank you. I think many of you know the rules for questions here. Unfortunately, we're taping and so forth, so although it's a little bit of a problem, I wonder if you'd mind speaking into one of the 2 mics. It means getting up, walking over to the mic, and it makes it a lot less fun in a way to ask a question than just, but I really encourage you just to walk over to the mic and ask a question, because you've got a wonderful opportunity here. I have to say that about 8 years ago, my mother died, and I went into quite a heavy depression. And I went into my HMO, and I had a terrific therapist who really helped me in about 5 sessions, a very insightful, very helpful black woman therapist who, in 5 sessions, gave me some tools that I've been using ever since. And I've had depression since then, but now I know how to recognize them, and I know how to go and get help for them. So particularly here at the Kendi School, I think the point that you made about being strong, we're all strong people, and we're all smart people. But the pressure here to excel is extraordinary. And there's a pressure on the faculty as well as the students. And so you have to learn just what you said. You can be strong, but you don't have to be strong all the time. You can be smart, but you don't have to be the smartest person in the room all the time. And that's the kind of thing that, if you go and get some help to just be able to live with and love life, in spite of the fact that you're not the absolutely top person in the room all the time, that can be a lot of help. So thank you really very, very much. I thank you from my heart. And here we have our first question.
Okay.
I'll try and stay with the question format and not comment, even though that's hard for me. My name's Ebony. I'm with the Journal of African American Public Policy. And my question is really about the action that it's possible to take around a lot of the issues that you addressed. One of the most powerful experiences that I've had in my few years on the planet was a session that I had with about 20 women on a retreat at Cornell University, and to this day I'm still overwhelmed when I think back on kind of how right beneath the surface so much of the pain and anger and just feelings of not being in touch with other people were, and how immobilizing that became for people. And I always struggle to figure out, well, what is the action that we can take to do that? I felt like, well, 2 days and a retreat with 20 women, well, that was great, but there's 38 million black people, half of them are women, and then all of us are struggling with depression, despite gender. And I'm really trying to get a hold on how we begin to do this in an action-oriented way that meets the needs of a broader group of people besides 20 people on a weekend.
Sure. Sure. There are a number of things, and I really appreciate that question because I think it's really important. There are some things that we can do. There are a number of things that you can do in a minute that can help to lower stress. Not cure. We're not talking about curing depression, but we are talking about taking care of ourselves, especially with stress. You can take a walk, daydream, breathe. You know how many folks forget to breathe during the course of a day? Stretch. Look out of a window. Now, these are things that you can do that some of them only take a minute. I generally ask people in my practice, one of the first things I'm going to ask you when you walk through the door is, what have you noticed that's different? What are you doing that's different? And the first thing, again, that we often cut out of our lives is pleasure. Okay? When we get tied up in taking care of tasks, one of the things we do is we cut the things out of our lives that signify that we're getting some pleasure in our lives. So one of the things we can do is we can give ourselves 20 minutes of pleasure daily. I think of it as rest. You can meditate. You can say a prayer. You can watch TV. You can flip through a magazine. Take a walk. You can talk to someone. It doesn't necessarily have to be a therapist. It can be a close friend. It can be a minister. It can be a trusted teacher. Sometimes just talking with just having the other person listen. And see, we have this thing where we like to give advice. Okay? My grandma said if advice was any good, it wouldn't be so free. And Lord knows she's right, because we all got some, and most of the folks giving it don't take it. Okay? So you might as well not give it away. So you can ask the person that you're with, I just need for you to listen to me. I don't want necessarily advice on how to handle it, because generally you're going to figure out how to handle it. But sometimes just talking about it. Journaling. Okay? People ask me how I started writing books. I got stacks of journals at home, folks. Now, I mean, like, and when I look back through those journals, that's a big part of it. Feelings just came pouring out. Because what I couldn't trust myself to say, I could write. So that's taking an action. Yeah. And you're right, one action can make a difference. Doing one thing will make a difference. Is that helpful? Okay.
I was just wondering whether you foresee a time when we're going to have a public health approach, preventive approach taken to mental health. Some screening tools that would be routinely given to the population of people rather than waiting to there's an episode for diagnosis?
Hopefully, I would love that dearly. Currently, I'm in the private sector. My practice is in an HMO, which is a whole nother story. But we have just developed now a screening tool that doctors are routinely asked to give patients when they walk through the door. That is a screening tool for depression currently, so that everyone who comes in is getting this tool and they're filling it out. And it gives us some clear indicators of, as far as depression goes, how people are dealing. I would love to see that go out in more of the public sector, because once it's identified, we can start treatment.
I guess I'm going to ask you a question around any work you have done around organizational life. I think the kind of organizational life and institutional arrangements that we have a lot of internalized oppression, with a lot of inequities that go on in organizational structures, put undue stress on people. We're not family friendly, we're not children friendly. And I was just wondering, as a mental health professional, have you done organizational work, and if you've done some of that work, some of your approaches?
I have treated individuals. Also, for many years, I did work around diversity in different organizations in the community. The bottom line is often about making the dollar. Yes, we go in and talk about issues and how they're affecting the workforce, but often, again, that gets set aside oftentimes when it comes down to what's happening with the dollar. I have done some work in just working with EPAs and management on management levels around talking about depression, the symptoms, what they're looking at. The bottom line is, their quick question is, when will this person be able to come back to work? So that's a lot of it. And hopefully, there'll come a time when our health is looked at as a part of our work environment. But right now, it's not the key thing.
Right, and I ask that because I think that that's where we have a large deficit and a void in looking at systems and how we as helping professionals can begin to help dismantle a lot of the hierarchy and dysfunction that goes on in institutional organizational life.
It takes all of our voices, and oftentimes, our voices are absent. Sometimes it's hard to be the only one in a meeting with a bazooka when everybody else got a fly swatter going on. You know what I'm saying?
When I am weak, then I am strong. And when I keep pressing on, then I make the achievement.
Thank you. Mm-hmm. That's it.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
My name's Claude Jacob, and I'm from Chicago. Just want to thank you again for your presentation. One quick question. How important do you feel it is to consider, I guess, the other dimensions of depression? You talked about looking at some of the mental health needs, and I'm thinking in terms of the spiritual dimensions of depression. So if you could speak to that for a moment.
Thank you for bringing that up, because I think it's a very important aspect, especially for us in our community. Congressman Stokes spoke to the fact that the Black church is often the hallmark of where we live, and oftentimes our leaders come out of the church. I think that when we don't feel well physically, it affects us emotionally. And when we're affected emotionally, it often calls in a crisis of faith. And the reason I say that is because we're more likely to look at our illness as some kind of punishment. And that's not what it's about. When we have that kind of sense of, I'm being punished for something I've done, we're talking value and belief there. And when you're looking at the whole kind of issue of treatment of depression, we're talking about dealing with core beliefs. And so we have to address our spiritual beliefs and move them to more of God being less of this punishing person as opposed to a person who wants us to heal and live healthy and productive lives. And so it's like moving a person through that kind of value kind of laden field. It does address some really crucial issues, because oftentimes I am not the first person that you all come to as a therapist. Generally, we go to our ministers and we go to the church. And I think it's very important that as ministers, there's more work done around pastoral clinical counseling so that they too can recognize the signs and symptoms of depression. Because depression is number one, folks. It's the leading disorder And it's not a mental disorder as much as it is an emotional disorder. It's an affective disorder. And without addressing that, it's very difficult to address other aspects. You know, my mama used to have a saying all the time, you know, the Lord ain't gonna give me more than I can bear. You know, and I used to find myself saying that a lot until I figured out God didn't give me depression. You know, I couldn't imagine God being that cruel. So again, but we had to move through that belief system in order to be able to do a lot of the healing that needed to be done. So I see faith as being a very strong piece of that healing and that wellness framework. Yes. Oh, I'm sorry.
Hi, my name is Kia Coleman, and I'm a student at the Kennedy School. And I guess I kind of had two quick questions. The first was, could you talk a little bit about depression in the context of male-female relationships in the Black community? I actually had a male friend of mine confide in me a few weeks ago about how sometimes he feels hostility and fear, I guess, in approaching Black women, and he feels that, you know, in certain relationships, that's something that has to be overcome. And I'm just wondering if you had any advice on how couples would relate to each other or help to foster a better commitment and avoid depression. And the second subject was, could you talk a little bit more about the relationship between Black women and their mothers? Because I think that is something, I think it is a very unique thing, at least speaking from my experience, that you tend to be very close with your mother and very in awe for much of your life, because it seems that your mother is doing everything all at once and you're trying to, you know, mirror that, but at the same time you realize as you get older that your mother is human. And so could you talk about healthy relationships in terms of depending on your mother in that context?
Gosh, that's a whole nother conference. I'll take the first one first around relationships, especially between brothers and sisters, because I think that, and again, some very interesting kind of like, I do what I call, you know, kitchen table research, meaning that I start pulling from my practice and looking at what I'm looking at in my practice and kind of draw some theories from there. So I guess a good way to put it is I got more theories than I got shoes. But some of them do pan out. A lot of, and again, Sharon's talk this morning, really kind of got my mind going, but a lot of the research that has been looked at as far as males and depression, there wasn't a big breakdown as far as race. But oftentimes what I've noticed when I've dealt with Black males in my practice who come in, who tend to be labeled with anger management issues, are actually dealing with depression. When I go through the criterion, that's what I'm actually looking at. And yes, there are social factors related to that, often having to do with workforce, some relationship issues. As far as relationship issues go, though, it's more Black women, okay? For women, and this is across the board, again, we're not breaking down because of race, 1 in 5 women will deal with depression, okay? Starting at age, I think the mean age was like 15. And the thing that triggers it is what? Relationships, okay? There is a lot of pressure in our society, and even within our culture group, to be part of, belonging to. And when that doesn't occur, we automatically deal with tons of self-doubt. When we look at the correlation between depression and self-esteem, what we see is that when depression is high, self-esteem is traditionally low. There's a gap there. Because depression feeds on self-doubt. And many of us, while we don't want to recognize it, often we're very image conscious. And that and the breakup of a beginning or start relationship has a very big effect on how we view ourselves. With men, again, across the board, it's 1 in 10 men. No, I didn't see any breakdowns for black males, but 1 in 10 males deals with depression. Their primary trigger was often work-related issues. So, you know, that comes up. Does it happen in, you know, do couples deal with depression together? Yes. You know, it kind of feeds off of each other. But we're often likely to kind of act out on it, like more anger, irritability, as opposed to others doing more shutting down and moving away from. So those are the statistics I've seen. As far as dealing with our mothers, well, what can I say? I guess I want to say is that our mothers and our foremothers, we have learned a lot. We stand on their shoulders when it comes to who we are as black women. They have forged many paths for us. However, our world is starting to look different. Our world does look different than their world does. And many times what I have found in working with family issues is that oftentimes what happens is as daughter moves up and away, mothers may feel more threatened by that move, in not seeing or feeling it be as close. I don't know that there's been any real empirical studies done around mother-daughter relationships, African-American mother-daughter relationships. I know there's some literature out there in the literary world that talks about it anecdotally. But I think it would be an interesting, definitely something interesting to look at in how we view that. Because I mean, like my mother and mama, my mother was mommy and her mother was mama. Okay, because mama lived with us, you know, which is a custom in many Southern black families. And so I was raised with my mother. My mother was kind of like my sister, and mama was big mama, okay? Mama ran the house, okay? We got to follow mommy after mama's had her say. But I learned what it was to be a woman from these two women. And what they showed me real clearly was that, you know, you can handle anything. You are a black woman. It is your job to take care of everyone else. And oftentimes, okay, that's what they did. My mother had 6 girls. She washed, starched, and ironed, you know, all of our clothes. You know, her idea of a convenience food was self-rising flour, okay? Mine is the microwave. So, I mean, like, that in and of itself, I mean, like, my mother was alive. My son, he would go and spend the summers with my mother while I was in school, and, you know, his favorite meal, I love this story, his favorite meal was fish sticks, you know, SpaghettiOs and spinach, or French fries. So he would go down and he'd visit my mother, and, you know, he came back in September one year, and he goes, "Can I have some fish?" I said, "Sure, baby." I'm reaching up there, I'm getting Mrs. Paul's fish sticks, right? He told me, "You know what, I know what a real fish looks like." So I had to call up Mom. I said, "Look, you don't have to get with the program." Okay? Because my mother was a stay-at-home mom. She did real fish. Okay? I sent him down the next year. He was about 7 or 8. He came back, he wants some French fries. So I'm reaching up in the freezer. He goes, "Did you know that you can make French fries from potatoes?" I said, okay. Do we have to do something here? Oh, okay. But I was like, who told you that? Yeah? Who told you you could make French fries from potatoes? said, "I've seen Grandma do it." I had to call my mother again. So look, when you go to the store, this is what you do. Okay? You got to get with the program or you don't get the kid no more. Yeah. So, that's just that whole shift. Just as my grandmother helped raise me, my mother helped raise my son. Yeah. So he's carrying a lot of her values just as I carried a lot of her values. And when we moved to Seattle, where I have no family, there was still a lot of those values that got passed on. But then I started changing things, which looked very threatening and scary to my mother. And when you change things and there's no precedent around that being done, it does look very threatening and very scary. So that's a lot of, that change that happens, and connecting with our mothers, because I think there is a way to stay connected without it looking threatening when we pull away. Yes.
My name is Milano Harden. I'm a staff person here at the Kennedy School. I guess my question kind of piggybacks on the conversation about black men and Clyde Franklin's work that links anger and invisibility. So for me, and the correlation between anger and depression, I'm actually kind of concerned that, in fact, we talk about depression, kind of an intrapsychic dilemma, and sort of sometimes disengage that from the social factors that kind of do promote invisibility for black men, which might be institutionalized racism. And so one of the things I guess I'm really interested in, what are some of the things that we can do transitioning from just a conversation about individual male psychology into a conversation about our kinship ties as a community and sources of resistance and resilience as a community? I mean, because my concern is that we're putting a heavier and heavier burden on individuals. You got to have better coping, you need your spirituality. But in fact, if we don't also, as a companion strategy, transform the cultures around our young men's lives, I feel like we're missing a huge public policy opportunity.
I think that it needs to start by educate, educate, educate. Young brother at lunch was talking about this. Is Brad here? I guess he's not here, but he was talking to me about, he had gone to a conference and they were talking about how do we start getting the information out there. And one of the things I'm saying is, I would love to see it, doing more educating of the folks who are in the positions to make the change. That goes for healthcare professionals. That goes for educators. Working with interns. I have interns coming in who work with me over a period of time as part of their internship, and I am teaching them, okay? I am talking about racial biases and about how institutionalized racism looks, because I'm recognizing that this is not something that they're going to get in the classroom. I didn't get it. It's still pretty much an elective for some. And that's scary, because you're right. We do deal, like as far as people of color go, and this is not just in the African American community, but in other communities of color as well, we do deal a lot with the social pressures that come up that do have an impact on how we view ourselves. So yes, that is a big factor. And the one thing that I can think of is the more we educate, the more we get the word out there, the bigger difference it'll make. But I also have to recognize too that even when we've had the changes as part of the laws, and I talk about this a lot, in going back to what the sister said, when I go into organizations, laws change the law. It doesn't necessarily change attitudes. And I think we've got to start there as well. Talking to individuals as well as talking to institutions can make a difference in how we view ourselves and how we deal with these issues.
We'll have one more question, and then we'll have to wrap up.
Okay.
Hi, my name is Nicole Travis. I'm also from Chicago. I was just wondering about, I didn't hear you deal at all with like the children, and I work for DCFS in Chicago, and I find that, well, when you were saying you see the males are, diagnosed with being, angry man syndrome or whatever, and I'm seeing that with the kids that are in foster care and adoption, a lot of the boys are going to counseling, and the girls too, going to counseling for, all these other kind of disorders, but hearing you talk about the depression of it, it kind of circles around. So I was kind of wondering what avenues or what therapy ways would you use to deal with children who are trying to cope with shifting from home to home, being adopted by people they don't know, and so on and so forth.
I think one of the primary things that has to be looked at is that we don't oftentimes want to recognize sadness. And I think for a lot of, not just children, but adults, in being able to recognize and acknowledge sadness gives people permission to be able to deal with it and move on. When we don't deal with it, when we kind of shut it down, ignore it, pretend it doesn't exist, what we do is we feed that depressed state. Because again, depression is like sadness run amok. And we have to look at the messages we give. We are, as adults, we're saying to each other, it's okay to talk about our feelings. But are we saying that to kids? And I think it's really interesting too. We tell kids, I want you to say no to strangers. Don't, if a stranger tells you to come here or to touch you, say no. Okay? But what the literature shows is we don't, especially in our community, we don't let our kids say no to us. That's not what we do. If they can't practice saying no to someone they feel safe with, how are they going to do it with a stranger? We've got to start being able to practice what it is we want to preach, basically. Yeah. We're talking about adults talking about feelings. We've got to do it with our kids. It's got to be okay for kids to be angry, sad, happy, excited, to feel good about themselves. We've got to be willing to hear them saying no to us. Okay? I didn't learn how to say no until I was in my 30s. I was scared to, okay? That's right. Thank you. You didn't say no. Not if you didn't want to get hit into the middle of next week. No, it's real for a lot of us. Not all of us, but a lot of us. I can remember my son being really angry with me at one point and going in a room and slamming the door, and my father just, he was ready, boy. And it's like, calm down. It's okay for him to be angry. He wanted to go outside and play, and I told him he couldn't go outside and play. It's okay for him to be angry. That's acceptable to me. What? You hear that boy slam that door? And it's like, we weren't taught that was okay. Yeah. And when we don't learn it as children, we can't practice it as adults. So we've got to start teaching kids to talk about their feelings. And we've got to be open to hearing those feelings no matter what they are, and not necessarily take them personal. We take a lot of things very personally. My son would say, I hate you. It's like, yeah, I hate you too. You in my way too. It's okay. You can hate me. Because in 5 minutes, he's loving me for something. But being open to hearing that means that I don't have to worry about him being open to talking about his feelings. And that's very important. And today, my son is 26 years old, and we talk a lot. And we talk about feelings a lot. And he's not afraid to show me his tears, and I'm not afraid to see them. Because I recognize that that's a very important part of being human. And that he will teach that to his son. So it's like, for everyone we teach, they teach. And we've got to keep teaching. And that's why it's so good to be here today, because I know I'm talking to our future, just like you will talk to our future when you leave here. So thank you very much and I really enjoyed it.
I too want to thank Julia Boyd very, very much. We're a policy school here, you know, and we look at organizations. Sometimes and I like the language you used, a companion. These are companion strategies. Sometimes we think, most of the people in this room, I think of themselves as social change agents, and we all face burnout. And when we do, we need to think about ourselves as individuals, and we need to think of ourselves in organizations. We've got to have that companion strategy, both institutional and personal. And I thank you very, very much for coming and helping us with that today.
Thank you.
We have a reception. Please, everyone stay for the reception.
I just want to say thank you, everybody. I've had an amazing experience today, and if you're anything like me, you're just about ready to go home. But before you do, I would encourage you all to come over to the reception. It's in the Taubman building where we've been all day long on the 5th floor, and for me, it's really an opportunity to celebrate how much we've learned today and how much we've shared together. There's plenty to eat. We've had a lot to eat today. I've had a lot to eat today. But just come over, share, socialize, and I hope to see most of you, all of you, there. Thank you.
Oh, yeah, that's fine.
I'm going to get to that because everybody's already lined up. Hello. Thank you.
Hi. Thank you.
Hi. Pleasure to meet you. I'm a student here at Kennedy School. And I've got my sister-in-law.